Next, we would like to welcome to the podium Mark Sanders, who's an independent researcher and currently studying for his PhD at the University of Hertfordshire. He did graduate in human biology from London some time ago, as his professional career has focused on pharmaceutical and the medical device industries. He's originated a number of patents aimed at improving asthma monitoring and inhaler technique. And since retiring from industry, he's taken on this study. His talk today is looking at how we can learn about inhaler compliance, which helps set up nicely the problem that hopefully the next talk is going to answer as well. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to recognize some familiar faces in the audience. It's great to see everyone. Okay, talking about inhaler technique training. And when we consider inhaler technique, we know why we use the inhaled route. It's fast, we can use low doses, we get less side effects, but we need to use the inhaler properly. They're complex devices. And the fact is that most patients are making mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are critical. We've all seen the House parody, haven't we? But the reality is that these things happen. And when they happen, the clinical outcomes are diminished. So what does guidance call for? Well, it tells us that we should be giving inhaler technique training and retraining and retraining. And I have to say that if Einstein was looking down, seeing us doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, he'd have a word, and that word would be insanity. The time that we're spending retraining people could be better spent on asthma management plans if only we could get them to do inhaler technique properly. So what actually is training? Well, for the Latin scholars, it comes from the word trahere, to pull, and that's exactly what a locomotive does. It pulls a train, but we use it in the sense of providing instruction that is to be followed. Of course, it doesn't imply the creation of understanding, and it doesn't imply that the instruction will be followed. So it's simply an output. We have tools to help us learn how to use inhalers and provide guidance to patients, and here are some of them: the placebo device, the AIM device, the inject device, the MagFlow, and then there's the whistle trainers, which started life with the Spinhaler whistle, and there's the facsimile devices with whistles in to guide training. There's the two-tone trainer, the flow tone, the clip tone, and the whistles in the valve holding chambers. Do they work? Well, they do. Yeah, there's evidence, not as much evidence as for the drugs, of course, but there is in vitro, pharmacokinetic, and clinical studies on the whistle trainers. And it would be reasonable to say that all the tools help initial acquisition of inhaler technique. But there are many studies that point to the loss of technique, and that's why we need the retraining. There is very little evidence for the retention of technique learning. And that's got to be an aim of what we do. We want people to learn, not just to be trained. So, as we heard, I'm doing a PhD at the University of Hertfordshire into looking at inhaler technique training tools to understand if there's a better job that we can do. And that's involved a detailed literature review of inhaler technique. And you know, there's one thing that stands out. The literature talks about training and not learning. But what we want to achieve is learning. If you were to conduct a Google search, you would find hundreds of papers, hundreds of retrievals for inhaler training, and only 6 for inhaler learning. After today, that might become 7. So if we go to PubMed, well, the phrase library doesn't include inhaler learning. It is simply not on the map. So we're not being served very well by inhaler training. I've looked at learning theory, and it's not dissimilar to the machine learning that we heard so much about. And I've conducted an audit of the training tools that we have to look at the different types of stimuli that they engage. And I'm going on to look at how the clinical evidence bears out which of those stimuli have the most effect. Let's talk about the audit. So down the left-hand side, you can see some of the different tools that we saw pictures of, and across the top, some of the audit categorization. Some of the tools are tools for use in the clinic. They start in the clinic, they end in the clinic, and that's it. Some of the tools can be used attached to a device or part of a device to provide on-device guidance to a patient after they've been inducted in the clinic. Some use reinforcement. We heard a little bit about reinforcement in machine learning, or positive reinforcement, encouraging, or negative reinforcement, telling us that we've gone too far. Some work with PMDIs, some are suitable with DPIs, and then there's VARC. What is VARC? It's not a Klingon phrase. It stands for visual, audio, reading, and kinesthetic. 4 different types of learning stimuli. And we can see that each of the tools engage some of those, not necessarily all. So in the case of the spinhaler whistle, we can see an A and a K because it's an acoustic signal and it's a kinesthetic device, so it's a hands-on process of learning. And then some of the tools provide real-time feedback, and that enables somebody to modify their behavior when they're getting real-time feedback. Let's look at what is learning, because we're talking about it, we haven't defined it. Well, that comes from the Old English lernen, the acquisition of knowledge, understanding, or skill. But it doesn't imply deep understanding. The acquisition of knowledge or skill then can be assessed by asking verification questions, and I'm sure we've all sat through those type of tests, or by demonstrating the skill by the learner. And at this point, I'd like to put a call out to the Netherlands, to Paul Hagedorn's group, who are using these techniques in their national inhaler technique guidance to reinforce the training that they're giving. But can we go further? I believe we can, and I believe that the digitalization processes are enabling us to look at resources that enable us to go further. And I want to take some analogies. I want you to cast your mind back to learning to drive a car. You weren't just given a set of keys and an instruction leaflet and told to get on with it. At least I hope not. There was a bit of perhaps theory, maybe some simulation, some practice, a bit more practice, maybe even more practice, and a test, maybe even another test. But there was detailed guidance. Same thing goes for riding a bike, a bit more simple in that case, or learning to swim. There was always a helping hand to help you through the first few sessions. Learning to read, again, a helping hand. Learning to march, not so much a helping hand, more somebody shouting at you, but a helping band playing music to keep you in time. Some complex and some more simple processes, all of which have got something in common, and that's the notion of guided use or guided practice. We don't get that with inhalers. What I would mean for an inhaler with guided use is a device that feeds back to you certain things as you are using it. And by guided practice, I would mean a practice device like a placebo unit that would also give you feedback. So there's a hypothesis about the need for guided use and guided practice. And in fact, there are 2 tools available to us that have this. One of which is the Kata app from Vision Health. And we can see this lady using her inhaler. in front of her smartphone, and her smartphone microphone, her smartphone camera are looking at what she's doing, listening to what she's doing, and guiding her through the process. This is guided use, and she's doing it right. The second example is the Cliptone and its buddy application. And in this graphic, you can see the user using the inhaler with a whistle attached, and their ear will tell them, are they using it properly? And if they choose to use an application, they can have guidance from that as well. Well, there's a clinical study running in the UK called ASSIST, and it looks at whether Cliptone Buddy will lead to the retention of inhaler technique and better outcomes. The last patient comes out in March next year. If it reads out positively, the notion of improving retention of inhaler technique shines a torch on where device development needs to go in the future, and where embodying these kinds of feedback mechanisms can help. What can we do in the meantime? Well, feedback is always important, and if we can do it in real time, so much the better. Reinforcement of good habit is wonderful, and I would stress positive reinforcement by good habit. Guided use and practice I've spoken about, and digitalization, how that can be adopted. It's more than just carrot and stick. We should be adopting the principles of learning theory. But if we do that, there are barriers to overcome. And some of those barriers are the regulatory processes that favor the use of existing technologies. Well, maybe that will change. There's the who pays. Well, if we get it wrong, if we don't embody these processes, society pays over and over as we conduct retraining. There is no one-size-fits-all. There's scope for lots of different innovation in this avenue. But you know, we've been here before. 180 years ago, Dr. Rogers wrote, "A medical man, when he orders a patient to inhale vapors, must give his personal attention to the manner in which it is performed, if he wishes to have his intentions efficiently carried out." Well, that sounds an awful lot like guided use. He got there a long time before we did, but maybe we can catch up. And with that, I would like to express my thanks to you all for listening, and to my supervisors at the University of Hertfordshire, Darren Murnane and Stuart Curtin, to the numerous clinical opinion leaders who've shared their thoughts with me, and to the manufacturers of the training tools that have provided help as well. And if there's any questions, I'll happily try to address them.